to students on 504s, SSTs, or pre-diagnosis, basically kids with learning differences. So before I begin, I'd like to, first of all, bring your attention to Linda Fazio, who's our membership lead. Want to raise your hand, Linda? So if anyone is interested in joining the Special Needs Committee or just wants to know more about us, Linda is your go-to person right there. They're right there. Okay. And before I go, I also wanted to recognize the other members of the Special Needs Committee as well. If you could just, stand up. I wanted to just acknowledge these are all parent volunteers, and they're their faces. Feel free to reach out to them if you feel the need. Okay, so before we begin, I'd like to go over some basic housekeeping. First is, please silence your cell phones. You don't want to be that one person whose, song goes off. Okay, next, restrooms are located just outside the exit doors. So don't go all the way outside, but between this set of doors and the next, you'll see men's restroom on the left and women's on the right. So I think that's about it. With that out of the way, I'd like to introduce tonight's presenter, Dr. Berman.
Thank you, Maritas, and thank you to the various committees and people involved with this. Most of all, thank you to all the parents. I'm tempted to write an editorial. KQED, and they offer a commentary or something that people get to write about. I'm a sports fan. I'm a terrible athlete, but I'm a sports fan. And I was really taken with something, many things, which they were talking about, heroic this and heroic that in sports. And I'm going to do a little bit of research in terms of the definition of the hero, which I think starts with Greek literature. With all due respect, athletes aren't heroes. Parents are heroes. You wake up every day with your child. You have to address the realization of the challenges that await you that day, the memory of what you had the day before, what might occur tomorrow, and you've got to do it with a smile and kiss that child awake every day. That's heroic. So please give yourselves a round of applause. A quick show of hands, if I may. How many are here tonight as parents of a child with a new term? You're going to hear a lot of terms. The international now PC term is diverse abilities. So having a child with diverse abilities. How many of you are here tonight for that? Great. How many are here tonight as professional educators of school systems? Wonderful. As physicians, therapists, psychologists, others. And anyone from the press. So the last time I did this, which was fine, was another group, and I guess I really didn't know that the lady, very kind, sitting there with the laptop, was writing her story. And sometimes I just get going. Some of you know this very well. I promote all my friends out there. And sometimes I just get going and I'm talking about a child and what's missing in our pressured society. They need to just sometimes sit and look at dust bunnies. Next thing I know, 2 days later, the front page of the Contra Costa Times is Dr. Berman talking about dust bunnies. Not quite what I had in mind as the soundbite phrase, so that's why I was. Okay, so tonight we have approximately 2 hours. And we'll see how it goes. I promise you, have 2 hours worth of lectures to speak about. Rather, I want this to be an intimate 250-person and one doc interactive dialogue. So there will be points when I present some slides, it's sort of just touch points or talking points, and then I'll stop and maybe elicit some conversation. Some of you are sprinkled throughout the group that are supposed to ask me questions as things are questions. One, during open sessions, I understand that you're here really because of what you want to learn about and understand about your child. I would be as well. But I'm also very careful to protect confidentiality and sensitive information. So when people bring up questions from the perspective of their child, if I think it's one of a confidential nature that I would prefer to speak about privately in what we call a one-off, there will be time at the end to be able to do that. But if we can generalize it so that the group can benefit from either the specifics of the question or as a leaping point to talk about some things philosophically or programmatically, then I will do so. The second thing is that at certain points, I may say, gosh, so many great questions, so many hands raised, but we've got to move on a bit. So, we will try and touch as many people as possible. If you need to get up and go for any reason, please feel free to do so. I've been dealing with kids for almost 30 years. I'm used to it. So, when Marites and others contacted me about what I was going to talk about, it was simply to talk about modern society, stress, anxiety, attention deficit disorder, autism, special needs, and services all rolled up into one. No problem. So what that means is that we're going to touch on a little bit of everything, but not go deeply into any one area per se. What this is not tonight, I'm always warned never to do this. What this is not tonight is an exact how-to. There are other ways to get that information. I can share with you. Many of you have resources. I have to tell you, I've been doing this almost 28 years now. I learn more from parents than anywhere else. You and your children especially are truly my teachers. And so the fact that you have this community that comes together, and we'll talk about communities, is just fantastic. And this is really the cornerstone. It's not doctors. It is schools to a degree because they are a community. It's not specialists. It's parents. It's community. But we will talk about terms, a little bit of definitions, but not in the way that you think about it. Concepts, philosophy, since it's such a broad topic, it either terrifies me or gives me complete freedom to talk about what I think is of interest and valuable to you all. And that's what I'm going to try to do tonight. So, anxiety, attention, learning, and behavior are everything I ever learned is about. To me, this slide, as simple as it is, really coalesces everything that I have come to appreciate and believe in child development. This is from a colleague of mine, Lynn Wegner in North Carolina. That it's really an interplay of society, family, and child. No family lives in isolation or shouldn't. No child ever lives in isolation. And it's the interplay of society. And hopefully, I'll tease you all enough and trigger enough thoughts to really have some conversation about that. Because I never really miss an opportunity to try and talk about that. I think that's really critical. This morning, hot article, there's many listservs that we have. One of mine is from an organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I read this morning. Overdiagnosis, how our compulsion for diagnosis may be harming children. How's that for a provocative title to an article? And that's something that we can talk about, but that relates to society. Society as it plays a role in children and families and so on. So we'll get into that. The biopsychosocial model of care, and hopefully this cord will extend. So the biopsychosocial model of care, which is at the cornerstone of the professional belief system as a developmental pediatrician we have, is that it's the biological, the psychological, and the social factors that play a significant role in health and disease. Now, when I use the term disease, disease really is dis at ease, so that applies to medical factors, health factors, emotional factors. People ask all the time, is this medical, is it emotional, is it behavioral, what is it? And the answer is it's all of the above. It always was. The Egyptians have this wonderful medical article. Somebody dug it up and figured out the hieroglyphics, and I read part of it, that makes no distinction. This was actually treating migraines. They didn't call it migraines at the time. There is no distinction between what the Greeks call psyche and soma. It's all of it. And fortunately, in Western medicine, which is lagging way behind the rest of the world, we're finally coming to that realization. Raise a child with diverse abilities. You guys are experts in this every single day. But it's not just biological, psychological, and social. It's spiritual. You know, that's belief systems, religious systems, non-religious spiritual systems, lack of spirituality, and so on. It's cultural. The beauty of working in the Bay Area as a professional is that we see essentially just about every culture imagined, every socioeconomic group, belief systems, stressors, cultural beliefs, and so on that play a huge role. So often I see children with speech and language delays that come from bi- or trilingual families. And of course, the critical question is, should we be speaking to our child in both languages, family language of origin and English? And unfortunately, and I'll stick my neck out as I always do, I think there's a missed opportunity of advice that's given often, which is you've got to stick with just English only. And what does that do? That completely negates an entire part of that child's life and that child's family. You need to be speaking your native language of origin. You need to be sharing in those cultural values. That is so critically important to you as a parent and to the life of your child. Socioeconomic. Why am I talking about socioeconomic in a well-to-do community of Pleasanton? Some of you may be Pleasanton, some not. One, because even in Pleasanton there's going to be levels of socioeconomics. Two, because I've been asked to talk about child development and its impact on brain and function, and socioeconomics has to be at the core. Every major research study that looks at developmental outcome for things like prematurity, autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, and so on. The one common factor that is shared by all is socioeconomic status. Socioeconomic status is more than just what your family income is. It's a measure of your educational level, which means access, which means ability to converse, which means the ability to comprehend, follow through, and so on. It means transportation. It means ability to afford medications. And that, of course, now is shared by everybody, right? People of many socioeconomic levels are having a hard time paying for their medication. There isn't a day that goes by in our office where that doesn't come up. So socioeconomic factors are critical, as well as within the community. So the resources available in Pleasanton will be just slightly different than the resources available in Livermore or Dublin, which will be just slightly different than Oakland, which will be different than West Contra Costa County and Richmond and so on. And that has a significant impact on the outcomes and the interplay with child development. And then family patterns. Again, the beauty of the Bay Area is I make no assumptions on family patterns anymore. And there's just an incredible richness of family support or lack of family support, family function or lack of family cohesion, from single-parent families to three-parent families, and so on. So you begin to get an idea. So when we think of the biopsychosocial model of care, relevant to your children, relevant to the children I see, relevant to what schools have to deal with, we must take into account all of these, what we call variables. Real quickly, this is all medically, why is this so important? Okay, doc, this sounds great, but let's get on to the meat of it. So Robert Haggerty, who's the grandfather of child development and developmental pediatrics in the mid-60s, was the first physician in the world. Eastern medicine's been this out centuries ago. And he's the first Western medicine physician that figured out the relationship between psychosocial stress and illness. This was with a group of 16-year-old girls in a small Catholic community that all came down with stress strep throats occurred. This was the first time. And a lot of you are shaking your heads because, of course, we know it. There's no better special need, diverse ability than autism to tell us about it. There's just certain times of year that children with autism seem to be more challenged, seem to be more behaviorally irritable. We use terms like allergies, tides, changes in gravity, mood, foods, whatever. We don't know, but there's often a clear, not clear, but a nice connection between environmental stressors, experiential stressors, and changes in behavior. Even with digestion. We think with our gut. Okay. So I'm going to hold this one for now, and I'm going to come back to this later. So, integrative healthcare. Hopefully you're beginning to get an idea of sort of what my philosophy is. Integrative healthcare, and I can think of no more appropriate area than children with unique needs as requiring demanding integrative healthcare. It's integration of multiple disciplines. It involves complementary and mainstream approaches. It's not one or the other. It's not they know and they don't. It's not we have the data. It's not we're going to do this to avoid something else. It's truly meant to be complementary, which is what the term is, and integrated. It stresses biological, psychological, social, spiritual. Psychological, social, in my mind, also means family support, parent support. Those of you who know me professionally, you know I wind up straying to like, how are you guys doing? Yeah, but this is about my child, and the answer is precisely. And health promotion and disease prevention. Early screening. One of the great achievements of the last 10 years has been the MCHAT. For those of you who are familiar with this, the MCHAT is a questionnaire that all pediatricians and healthcare providers, even some in schools or child care centers now implement, where they interview the parents and ask the parents to fill this out when the child's 18, 21, 24 months of age. And it's a screener for children who may be at risk for autism. Doesn't diagnose anything, but it just selects out a population that may be at risk. And it has been in the United States, in the UK, Canada, Australia, a crowning success of early screening. So early identification to allay worries. I saw a family today where it turns out their child really doesn't have significant developmental issues. I mean, that's incredibly powerful. Is that worth being evaluated? Yeah, I think so. And we can talk more about that in open dialogue. So health promotion and disease prevention, or developmental prevention. Integrative healthcare has to be interdisciplinary. I go to IEPs pretty regularly. I talk with schools weekly. I know there's some school professionals here, so if I say anything wrong, just sort of go like this. I will pay attention. I have to remind myself, and I have to remind professionals, as we're debating what to do with the child, that it's not our child. The child belongs to you guys. The child is the child of the parents, not of the teachers. No matter how much you care. Not of the school system, not of the docs, not of anyone but the parents. And so you're at the center of this interdisciplinary approach. And parents and child have to be at the center. That's where organizations like this are so important to help you find your voice, right? Integrative healthcare facilitates communication, patient co-management. These children are more complex than one developmental pediatrician is going to take care of. It requires multiple professionals. And of course, complementary and alternative medical approaches. Absolutely. Exercise, yoga, bike riding. You know, when I'm into things like vitamins and other stuff, which we can talk about as you wish. So that's what integrative healthcare is. And that's what integrative developmental least one of us in the room had a feeling as he walked into the room tonight and realized there were going to be over 250 people. A feeling of fear, worry, and unease. So, question for the group. Who owns the anxiety? Who has the anxiety? Everybody, right. Certainly the child has anxiety, right, in terms of expectations, ability, performance, output, requirements, number of people they have to deal with. Bitter irony, intervention for autism is that they have the most number of faces. For the child who has the least capable ability to handle this. Or, the child without special needs and the anxiety of the mind morbidity. Every day, anxiety. What's this day going to be like? How many of you sit there, hopefully not, but how many of you sit there and think, when's the phone call coming? Yeah, and what's it going to be about this time? And how many school professionals have that same anxiety from the other end, which is, when am I going to have to make the call? So we all share the anxiety. We're all in the same soup. Different perspectives, different entry points, different exit points, but we all share the same anxiety. And I got to tell you, this should go without saying, anxiety is a really common feeling. Out of all the feelings that we can have that we would call negative states or depression on, yeah, there's some situations that are critical, but anxiety is a really easy feeling. Stress. So what is stress? Stress is a response to a stressor. What is a stressor? A stressor is anything that can disrupt homeostasis. What is homeostasis? Balance. Stable. Constant. In balance. All of us can get there. The challenge, of course, is holding it, but that's a whole other conversation. Every child with special needs, with unique, diverse abilities, maintains homeostasis or can. It will be unique, it'll be a different pattern, they may use different ways of doing it. Some children need to pace, okay, you gotta pace. But that maintains homeostasis. But then something happens, small, large, a stressor, and it causes a disruption. And then you see stress that can be experienced both externally and internally. And then the fun begins. It's all about attempts to address the need to get back to homeostasis. And that's where both functional and dysfunctional behaviors occur. Okay? Hair pulling, nail biting, yelling out in class, excessive toileting. It goes on and on and on. And then the more unique the child's abilities and challenges with communication, the more that becomes physical, the more that becomes behavioral. It's difficult. I'm not suggesting that in any way, shape, or form this is science. It's not a simple thing. But most of it, or at least a good portion of it, is that child's struggle just to get back to balance. And then, of course, it's not just the child struggling to get back to balance, but the student who also shares that. Yeah, the entire family. Absolutely. And lest we forget the siblings, right? Oh, yeah. So it's all about trying to get back to some level of homeostasis. And so as a consequence, the manifestations for everyone can be physical, behavioral, emotional. Which is why we started this conversation with that biopsychosocial model of healthcare, right? We have to address it from all of those areas. Doesn't matter what the diagnosis is. So, I'm going to roll up my sleeves for a second. This is a photograph of a little girl with Down syndrome from Bhutan. Bhutan is a small Himalayan country sandwiched between China and Tibet, I think it's called Tibet, and India. And it's a beautiful country diverse abilities takes into account everyone. There's a brand new playground in Walnut Creek at Heather Farms that I went to a special showing of it last week, and it's going to open for prime time on October 30th, called the All Abilities Playground. It is spectacular. It is just knock your socks off spectacular. And the notion of them making it all abilities was brilliant. All children play. But unfortunately, because of our society, and really as the world gets, we need to understand what we're dealing with, and so that's where the term difficulty with ability comes into play, or disability. So what's the current definition internationally? It comes from an interaction between health and contextual factors. It can be environmental and personal. Gosh, that sort of sounds like a biopsychosocial model. Steve Hinshaw, who's a fabulous researcher at UC Berkeley, who recently wrote a new book about ADHD, talks about it not only in the book, but in his musings all the time. The genetics of ADHD has always existed. People have had ADHD before, but it never became truly an issue until compulsory education occurred. An interplay between, now, that can be debatable. I'm sure some kids in the Crusades got lost along the way. But it's a really great alliteration of this interplay of biology and environment. And I am certain many of you deal with this on a daily basis with your children in schools. And expectations and abilities to support or lack of support. By the way, I am not here to pit us versus them. That is quite to the contrary. I will continually drive home the message. We're all in this together. Okay? So it comes from an interaction of ability and contextual factors. Family, cultural, socioeconomic, educational, play, peer, employment, and so on. That's what defines ability versus disability. In the hearing impaired and deaf world, and there's Andrew Solomon's book wrote about this not too long ago. If you are a speaking, hearing person, you have a disability in your community. Think about that for a minute. They don't see themselves as being disabled at all in their communities. So it's very contextual. There are physical challenges, activity limitations, and participation restrictions. And those participation restrictions run the gamut from sports, social, peer, academic, driving, eating, going out to restaurants, so on and so forth. You all live it. I don't need to elaborate on it. That's part of the functional definition of treatment. So, just briefly, and I'm just throwing out a couple of statistics just to run a few things by you. How many children with disabilities do we have in this country? And this just gives you a really quick breakdown. So, the wealthiest country on earth, healthcare system, prevention, etc., 14%. When you're on Jeopardy, now it's Trebek's asking you the question, it's 14%. This compares to, let's say, Sweden, 8 to 12%. Iceland, probably about 8%. Sub-Saharan Africa, 50%. Bhutan, over 30%. So you can get an idea. But there is a background rate of around 14%. Could we get that down? Yeah, sure, based on environment and environmental factors, certainly. But there will be a certain element that will always exist. This is an example. I'm not here, even though so many of you have children with ADHD and Chad is involved and so on. I am not here just to talk about one particular unique ability. But ADHD gives me a nice example here because so often it's not the primary disability that creates the challenges, it's everything else associated with it. And so if you just look at ADHD for a minute, it's estimated that a third to a half may have learning I would have changed this slide to more like oppositional behavior. You know, it's difficult enough to raise a child who gets lost going to brush their teeth. It's another thing when they take their toothbrush and throw it at you as a dagger. Anxiety, depression, speech and language problems, any neurodevelopmental disorder, 67% of them have coexisting, that's what comorbid means, coexisting conditions. And that's often what will lead families to seek additional help. It's not the primary issue, it's the coexisting thing. So this is where diagnostic labels help, but then don't help enough. This is where we're forced to think in a reductionistic way. We're forced to think that there's only one primary eligibility in the IEP form, when in fact there's really 4 things that you're dealing with. And how do we think in a more expansive way? Because that's how you're going to address the needs and abilities of that particular child. Does that make sense? Any disagreements or different opinions on that? Be brave. Okay. So what are the effects? For example, if we look at ADHD, what are the effects of the comorbidities? Not the ADHD, but the coexisting stuff. Well, it increases health visits. It increases use of mental health services. It increases special education services. It's expensive. It's expensive by cost. The current cost, 0 to 18 or 21, for a child with autism is between $1.8 and $2.4 million in this country. Think about that. Now, yes, things are expensive here, etc., but it's expensive. It's expensive by money. It's expensive by time, labor, and so on. And it's often the coexisting stuff that's the real challenge. Which is why one of my pet peeves, I'm going to sit down a little bit. One of my pet peeves is to avoid, and I teach residents at UCSF and Children's Oakland, is to avoid terms like this kid, you know, this ADHD kid, or this autistic kid. You know, that's a reductionist labeling, to my mind, very short-sighted view. It's a child with, or a child who has, or a child who challenges. And I know this sounds really PC and really kind of nice, and I'm just warming you up for the meat of it, and you guys challenge me with the stump and chuck questions. But it's really important to get a sense of grounding of where things are and how we approach children with such diverse ability. So the coexisting conditions often are things that are challenging. This is a point at which I'm reminding myself, and I don't have a slide for it, but I don't think it needs one. Because I was severely chastised about 16 years ago when I was doing a workshop in San Ramon that we forgot to mention about the good stuff. Our children's abilities, not disabilities, but abilities. And so that is critically important as well. It's what your children are able to do, what brings a smile to your face. You know, I've had the distinct honor and pleasure of listening to and experiencing and sharing in the joy of so many accomplishments that your children have that one's not going to make the evening news, but it's just as vital, just as valuable, just as large a thing as running a marathon or flying around the world or whatever. All children have ability, and it is incumbent upon all of us, parents at the center, all of us to help support, to remember that and find it. It's not always easy, especially when you're tired and exhausted and drained, and it feels like nothing's going right. And you know, some days you're not going to find that ability. Some days it's just not going to feel like things are going well. That's okay. That's inevitable. There's always an ability for, you know, that form of ableness. Okay. So what's child development? concept of child development because of what I do. It's how I think. It's what I teach families and children. It's what they teach me every single visit, and it's important just to sort of gloss through. Child development is this unfolding process of growth and maturation from fetus through adolescence. It's neurologically driven, CNS, the central nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord. It's absolutely driven by maturation. It's a sequential, orderly, time, and predictable process. Oh, and here's this biopsychosocial thing again. Interaction between biological, social, and environmental influences. And again, conditions such as ADHD and autism have really forced us as a culture, as a society, and as a healthcare system to really think this and realize, oh yes, that's right. Couple of things. Sequential, orderly, time, and predictable, except when it's not. Which primarily is related to injury. Now that may be a chemical, metabolic, physical injury. Sometimes it doesn't come that way, and yet, with exceedingly rare exception, all children go through the same process in puberty. Independence, management of drives, aggression, and sex. Sexual drives. They do it in different ways, they do it at different levels. Some children are almost completely asexual, others are not. But it's the same theme, it's the same content, it's the same process. So that's what child development is. Now, quick question, I want somebody to shout it out. At what age do you think girls complete neurologically, not physically, but neurologically, the process of adolescence? Anybody? Girls? 19, good. 25 gives me a tough time. 21 is approximately for girls. And this is based primarily on very elegant neuropsychological and brain MRI studies. Now, what about for boys? Yeah, I'm hearing like ever. I was at a dinner party. My wife tells this story because she's still a gog over it years ago with friends. And somebody asked the question, like, what age do you feel like now, right? Because we're all getting older. Somebody says 45, 15, whatever. And I go, like 9. Which is true. Boys, about 28 to 29. Why is this important? Expectation. Expectation is a critical word. We expect things out of children that I think is just off balance with what children are ready for, capable, and able to do. Do I expect 12-year-old boys with ADHD to remember to turn in their homework every day without being reminded? Not a chance. Like almost ever. Do we want them to be? Yes. And of course the damage to that, not the damage, but the challenge to that was on one glorious sunny day, the rotation of the Earth's axis is such that they actually do it, and then we think, I expect you to do it every day. And there's the trap. And it is a trap. It's a trap of expectation. So it's important to understand the underpinnings of child development. Truly, boys don't really complete adolescence until late 20s. Now, you can look at that one of two ways. The glass half empty approach is, oh my God. The glass half full is, thank goodness we got time. And that's how I would look at it. It's not failure to launch, it's I'm still an adolescent. And it's true. Okay? Most children are normal, and I realize that's a challenge to discussions such as this. But I give a lot of these talks in a lot of different ways. And most children with diverse abilities have normal themes. It's the themes we need to pay attention. How they're expressed is absolutely unique, and sometimes we have to use that concept of disability, of course, but the themes are usually normal. Most unusual behavior can be understood, sometimes not. Most. Development is not an even process. Does anybody here question this? Oh my gosh. It is never an even process. So, when you have a child with motor delays, or cerebral palsy, or muscular dystrophy, or whatever, and you see them make growth, it's sort of like a giant staircase leap, right? And then there's a long plateau, and then there's another upward. And that's what exists for everyone. It's just smaller. You don't see the little staircase, and so it comes off as a smooth curve. It's never a smooth curve. And that's why it's so important. Because so often we have to deal with the fear of plateau. And yes, there are times that plateaus occur, and that's going to be where your child's going to be operational. That doesn't come till much later. Okay? Sometimes plateaus are really long. And what's really frustrating about it, no matter how hard we try, is sometimes we can't really influence the length of that, because that's very brain related. But it's a plateau, and there will be the opportunity for another step up. And then most families, and I don't need to tell you guys this, I mostly am giving this to other professionals, most families do their best for their children, given their beliefs, education, understanding, and range of resources. So, just thought of something new. Most schools do their best for children, given their beliefs, education, understanding, and range of resources. Most schools, most professionals do their best. Absolutely, we don't always agree. And if you get 3 professionals in the room, you'll get 4 opinions. But most schools, most teachers, most IEP teams really are trying to do right by your children. There are absolutely caveats, exceptions, and terrible schools. But by and large, we're all trying to do what's best, just as you do every day. Any idea why I bolded the first one? Everyone take a gander? Yeah, why is that important, Joanne? Parents know their children best. Why is that important? Because it helps them to provide feedback about their children, about what they're thinking. This is the frustrating part of the discussion for me as a physician, which is parents really know best, but not everybody believes that, and not everybody's listening. Yeah?
Parental intelligence is often discounted by professionals.
That parent?
Parental intelligence is often discounted by professionals.
Absolutely. And as a professional in this field, I will own that criticism. You're absolutely correct. Yeah, there's research studies actually to show that parents are right, with all due respect, moms in particular, although there's a lot of dads here, and of course you're all accurate as well. But you know, if a parent says there's a problem, if a parent says I'm concerned, you're right until shown not right. You don't need to be experts in exactly what it is. That's why you go to your teacher. That's why you have an IEP. That's why you see a professional. But you know what's best for your child. So if there's one thing I'm going to pitch for our IEPs, this is the only thing I'm going to pitch, is you are an equal and central member of this team, always. Okay.
I'm looking at that method and I'm thinking, parents should know that help can do to ask effectively. I didn't ask certain questions and,
Yeah.
how often was your child have an outburst in the last 2 weeks? And, it could be 20 or it could be 1. So
Absolutely, and that's part of the mission of so many of us professionally, in whatever professional field we're in with kids, to ask the right question. It's really about asking the right questions and then listening to the answers. You bet. But I'll also thrust it upon you as parents. If you're not, those of you in the room whom I know are very good at reminding me that you're not getting it, Doc. Okay? That's what you need to do. And, many of you are finding that voice. This is not about intimidation. This is not about taking no. This is not about, if you're not being heard, if you're not getting the message, speak louder. Say, help me to help understand my child, because I don't get it. Oh, don't worry, she will grow out of it. How many of you have heard that? Yeah, they're just boys. Woe to the just boy. How did my brother and I ever make it? That's right. If you're concerned, there's a reason to be concerned. And you need to keep knocking on that door. And again, I'm not here to solve the problem. So should you change doctors? Should you change schools? Whatever. But it does require you to follow that worry instinct and up the volume of your voice so that they really do hear you. Now, you need to frame it in ways that that particular professional can get it. Help me hear. And be specific about what you're really concerned about. Okay? Often, I'd say the most frequent question other than ADHD is, could my child have autism? And I would say in my practice, it's a very skewed specialty practice, the diagnosis is made only about 60% of the time, maybe 70%. It means about 30 to 40% of the time the child doesn't have autism. But all you need to do is ask that question. I am worried that my child is doing this. That's all it requires. And somebody to listen, and then you get it. A child's developmental gain has an effect upon their family and environment. And that's almost always positive, except when it's not. And I can think of no better normative, neurotypical gain than walking. Life is really, really easy when your baby doesn't walk. And the moment they start walking, oh my gosh. And remember the times that you were so concerned that your child wasn't ever going to toilet train? And then they started to sit on the potty, and then you had to find that you needed an app for instant toilet everywhere you go. And you'd be mowing the days of changing them in the back of the station wagon. I still do it. My daughter's in her 20s. So, that's an effect on family and environment. Okay. Community influences on learning, and I'm sort of repeating myself. Socioeconomics, mobility, safety, etc. Many of you will know professionally that I have a particular thought process about one unique environmental stressor, electronics. And I never miss an opportunity to comment on it, because it comes up daily. And I won't get on my soapbox for too long, because I want to get to other stuff. But, this is old information already, so I'm just going to let you read that for a second. And I keep thinking to myself, is this what we want to be exposing children to? And certainly, no, I don't want to expose myself to it. And remember, I'm a sports fan, which means I got to watch some of this stuff. The promise and the problem. That's all I'm going to comment on right now. We can entertain it in open dialogue as you wish. Okay, we're coming up on the first hour, so I want to run just through a couple of quick things and then really open this up much more for dialogue. Child development, real quickly. Young children, 4 major areas: sensory motor, like walking, balance, fine motor, speech and language, cognitive, early problem solving. Yeah, that's problem solving. great subjects, but I'm going to keep it short. Number one, to sustain self-esteem, to feel good about oneself. Self-esteem, I would define as a very complex subject. It's sort of like Newton's law. Self-esteem is neither created nor destroyed, it just gets modified. There are certain situations where self-esteem can be crushed, events and post-traumatic stress experiences, that's extraordinary. But kids want to feel good about themselves. So when you have a child with diverse abilities, guess what? They want to feel good about themselves. To find social acceptance, a time to make it beyond family. Now this is the neurotypical. There are uniquenesses for this with some of the children you care for. There are uniquenesses in the patterns of it. But even most children on the spectrum, in one way or another, want to make it at some level, doing their own unique way. They may or may not have desire for admission to a peer group, or we have to redefine what peer means. These all come from Mel Levine. Real quickly, typically, as they navigate through middle childhood towards the end, as they get into young neo-adolescence, is to reconcile individuality versus conforming to the peer group. And that's what they go through really all the way through. This is where they start to like the same team, or they like the same Pokemon cards, but my card is better than yours, and so on, because they're trying to balance individuality versus group acceptance. To appropriate role models, modeling and identification. This is where they like, the Selenas and the Justin Biebers, role models that they are, and the athletes, and unfortunately, what they are exposed to on the internet. So this is where things like that come into play, guys. But it's very normal for kids to think about role models. Hopefully, role models are people like teachers, like parents, but beyond parents as well, teachers, relatives, and so on. Very normal. And then adolescence. Early adolescence really comes down to, it's a complex area. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. This is sort of the middle school years. The middle school years are really dominated by your egos outside your body, not in. So it's all about how am I compared to others, which is why they go nuts if their hair is a certain way, or their clothing is a certain way, or unfortunately the cell phone, smartphone phenomenon. It's about making it. It's about conforming. It's about trying to reconcile your notion of who you are as a group. Later, in adolescence, as you traverse through adolescence, it's a slowly evolving concept of who am I as an individual, both within a group and then out of the group. And again, you will see strong differences between girls and boys as they get older. Boys still have that hard time sort of getting out from the group. Girls tend to do a better job, not perfectly, but of developing a more sense of individuality within a group and separate from a group. But boys often get there. Realistic body image, appropriate expression of sexual drives, expansion of relationships outside the home. But you have to think about this, guys. I should say that. Relative to raising a child with diverse abilities, ADHD, learning disabilities, Tourette's syndrome, even autism, cognitive disabilities, and so on. We're still trying to do this stuff. It's how to interpret it and how to help them navigate this journey. Because they're going to do it. They're either going to do it with you or without you. I would much prefer that they do it with us, as the village. It's not easy. It's not easy to understand. It's going to be, at times, very frightening, very challenging, and it's really going to call into question your values, your spirituality, your belief system. Develop and implement a realistic plan to achieve social and economic stability. That, of course, is a much more unique discussion in children with diverse abilities. tonight. How would you like to organize this?
I think if people could come up to the mic so everybody can hear the question.
Okay. So somebody out here, I have a lot of this. So somebody out I'm going to set the mic up in the middle of the room. And you can come up to the mic. I will also say that as we go through this, and you have particular questions again about your child, those ground rules will apply, but let's see how we can sort of be flexible. Thank you. Let's move it back. Nobody likes to stand.